This video is sponsored by me. Now, I know you didn't ask, but I offer tutoring sessions in French and English, and if you're interested in that, sign up for a free trial session with the link below. If you're an English speaker and you've been putting off learning French because it looks hard, I'm here to tell you that those doubts of yours don't really align with reality at all, because you're actually in a much better position than people who come from other non-Romance languages. I know 7 languages, I think, and up to a month ago, French was the newest language that I'd learned. I started learning it when I was 20, but somehow it's already become the second best language that I speak. Just for comparison, I spent 6 years in Chinese school as a kid, copying characters until my wrists hurt, countless hours in class reading texts, speaking the language every day, and yet somehow, my French was able to overtake all of that progress after just 2.5 years of learning it as an adult. And the reason I was able to progress so much more quickly in French, I can tell you with absolute certainty that it's almost entirely because English is my native language. In this video, I'm going to convince you that learning French as an English speaker is actually way easier than you think, and hopefully motivate you to finally start your French learning journey. Of course, I have to start off with how similar English is to French. About 29% of all modern English words come from French, and while this might not sound like a lot, when you look at how other languages compare to French in this regard, French actually has the largest influence on English out of any foreign language. This percentage can easily shoot up to way more than 50% in more sophisticated contexts like law, academia, government, the corporate world, just to name a few. Most of these are nouns, of course, but a lot of the verbs that are extremely common in everyday English come from French as well. Examples include changer, continuer, décider, accepter, arriver, imaginer, entrer, payer, contacter, organiser, préparer. I can go on and on and on and on, and it's the same story for adjectives as well. Even the way you form adverbs is the same. Like, just take the ly ending that you have in English and replace it with ment in French. For example, generally becomes généralement, naturally becomes naturellement, literally becomes littéralement, and so on and so forth. You have all of this shared vocabulary, and when you couple that with all the similarities in grammar, as well as how both languages have the same sentence structure, so subject, verb, and object, you can just think of a phrase in English, translate it directly to French, and it'll work out like 80% of the time at least. Even the most complicated grammar concepts like conditionals carry over directly, which is something that I kind of took for granted until I started learning Italian. Like, what do you mean I should be saying would have instead of would here? Not to mention how in Italian you skip the subject and head straight for the verb, which kind of comes unnaturally for me as an English speaker. I'm not sure if other English speakers feel the same way. Let me know. Sentence structure gets way crazier in other languages I know, such as Japanese, where the verb always comes at the end. And I've heard that it's kind of the same thing in German and Dutch as well. Not to mention how much more these languages differ from English in terms of structure compared to French. Like, Japanese has 3 different writing systems and different ways to pronounce each of the thousands of kanji characters. German has 3 different genders and 16 different ways to say the word the, I think. Basically, I feel like the more you speak French, the more you realize it's basically just fancy English with a special accent. Now, there are some important differences that you do have to get used to in French grammar, stuff like gendered nouns, the 2 different ways to say you, so vous versus tu, the placement of object pronouns is inverted in French, and then you have the concept of the reflexive and the subjunctive, but these are all either things that are very superficial that don't really impact the meaning of what you're trying to say, or things that are really easy to get used to because they don't require that much memorization. What you do need to put some effort into memorizing, though, are auxiliary verbs, prepositions, and contractions. But even then, there's not that much to memorize, and once you have these down, the rest is easy because French functions pretty much the same way English does, structurally. Most of the things that you have to memorize are superficial. So far, I haven't mentioned verb conjugation, which, to be fair, is way more complex in French than it is in English. And this might actually be the hardest part of French to learn for an English speaker, but this is balanced out by the fact that French has way less tenses in everyday speech compared to English. Let's use the phrase I eat as an example. In French, there's no distinction between I eat and I'm eating because they both translate to je mange. Same thing for I ate, I've been eating, I've eaten, I did eat. In French, it's just j'ai mangé. Both I was eating and I used to eat are covered by je mangeais. Like, I can go on and on, but the sheer number of continuous tenses, and especially irregular verbs in English, don't exist at all in French. So that already makes French way less complex in one aspect. And I feel like this is a good segue into one other aspect of French that makes it easier to learn than English, which is consistent pronunciation. On the surface, French does seem like it has more difficult pronunciation rules than English. Like, for example, you're not supposed to pronounce the last letter of most words, but then for some words you still do. There's the concept of liaisons and a whole list of letter combinations that have their own distinct sounds. Plus, you have all these nasal vowels that don't exist in English at all. It can feel pretty overwhelming learning all of this for the first time, but since the rules that hold this all together in place are actually quite straightforward and consistent, you'll notice pretty quickly that there's a clear pattern to French pronunciation, and you'll get used to it pretty easily as well. It took a few days, tops, for me to learn how to pronounce just about every French word I see. I remember seeing this post a few years ago on social media, basically mocking the French language for the word oiseau, which means birds in French. Apparently, none of the letters are pronounced the way that they should be, plus the spelling is just way too complicated for a two-syllable word, which I completely understand from an English speaker's perspective. But get this, oiseau is pronounced exactly the way it should be, according to the French rules of pronunciation, and anyone who knows basic French pronunciation would be able to pronounce this word easily. Basically, almost every letter in French has a fixed sound. Some letters like C, G, and S have two sounds, but it's very easy to know which one to use because the rules are purely binary. And like I said earlier, the same letter combinations almost always make the same sound. Now, there are exceptions for this, like ville versus fille and the letters OI in oignon versus oiseau, but these are very rare, which is not the case at all in English. Bomb, comb, and womb are all spelled the same way, but somehow they're all pronounced so differently. Same story for read and read, tear and tear, minute and minute, mountain and maintain. Oh yeah, and there's also the words that you have to pronounce differently based on the context, like record and record, present and present, produce and produce. Oh yeah, and here's a good one. For the words Pacific Ocean, none of the four C's are pronounced the same way. And of course, I can't forget tough, though, thought, through, and thorough. Basically, all I'm trying to say here is that, despite how much more complicated French seems on the surface, once you dig a little bit deeper, you'll find that spoken English is actually way more irregular and messier than spoken French could ever be. So if you already speak English, you might feel better knowing that you're coming from a language that's way harder to master how to speak in so many ways compared to French. I'm pretty sure a lot of people would agree with me on this one, but I feel like in general, it's just way easier for a non-native speaker to sound native in French than in English. I've met so many French people that speak English just as well, if not better than I do, but I can still tell right away that they're not native speakers because they can't nail the 10,000 different quirks in English perfectly. At the same time, I've lost count of how many times I assumed someone was French just because they spoke French really well, and even I get that question sometimes from French people themselves, which goes to show that your effort really does go a long way when it comes to learning how to speak French. And I just want to add one last thing. French people will correct you and finish your sentences for you every chance they get. And in my experience, this has made learning French way easier compared to Japanese, for example. You go to Japan, you use some basic phrases to order something, and once they find out that you're not Japanese and that you're a foreigner, they'll go on and on about how well you're speaking the language even though you're butchering it, and they'll never actually teach you the best way to say something. Alright, I hope I motivated you to start learning French, since that's all I had to say today. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I always enjoy reading what you guys have to say. If you're interested in learning either French or English with me, check out the link in the description below. And until next time, have a great rest of your day. Bye guys, love you.